Tonight we are joined by 3 of the 4 GOP candidates for governor, Jeff Johnson, Kurt Zellers, and Scott Honor. Due to scheduling conflicts, Marty Seifert is unable to attend tonight. We did send the Seifert campaign some of our questions ahead of time, and we will read an opening statement sent by Marty Seifert. We will, now's probably the time to let our live audience know that if there's any booing or hissing, we've got people around that'll kick you out of here real quick. We want to show how civil conservative radio listeners can be.
All right, we randomized prior to the debate the order for the opening statements and the candidate-specific questions. We came up with Scott Honor first, Kurt Zeller second, to Jeff Johnson third. So we'll start with Scott Honor with your opening statement.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on tonight. So I'm a businessman. I'm not a politician, and I'm looking to bring a little common sense back to St. Paul. Over the last decade, I helped build a business that bought and fixed 60 companies. In an aggregate, we had about 50,000 employees, $20 billion in sales. Most of those companies were underperforming when we bought them. And one of the lessons I learned there is when something's going the wrong way, change it quickly. And this state is continuing to make decisions that's taking it on the wrong path. And I'm looking to partner with the citizens of this state to take on the politicians and push forward an agenda that will make the state better for everyone. Because I'm not a politician, I'm not going to be beholden to special interests. I'll be able to be free to make the decisions in the best interests of the state. I'm the only candidate with a bold agenda for reducing spending in government. I'm the only one that wants to eliminate MNsure. I'm the only one who's called on President Obama to not bring this immigration crisis from the southern border to our state's border. I'm the only one calling for term limits. And I'll have the resources to beat the governor in November. I've raised significantly more than any other Republican candidate, and I've raised twice as much as Governor Dayton this year. I'll have the plan and the resources to win. Look forward to tonight's debate.
Thank you, Scott. Next, Representative Zellers, your opening statement.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks for everybody, especially to K-Talk for hosting us tonight and for the live studio audience. Let's see if they're out there. Good evening.
Good evening. What did I say about the noisiness?
They're not booing, they're cheering. They see Ben in a tie. He's got a suit made for radio. Well, hey, I want to say thanks first and foremost for the opportunity to be here. We've done this a number of times in a lot of different settings, in bars, in bingo halls, and I think in a couple of different, I think one was a golf course. But if you travel around the state, Minnesotans are worried about 2 really important things. What's the state going to look like in the future, and what kind of career are they going to have in their lives and for their children's lives? I got into this race because I've heard enough of my friends, their children, their grandchildren now talking about, am I going to be able to have a job here in Minnesota? Is my career going to stay in Minnesota, or am I going to be like too many other Minnesotans who've now had to move to Austin, Texas, to Research Triangle Park, down to South Carolina, because that's where my career is taking me, because Minnesota is uncompetitive. Whether it be tax policy, whether it be regulatory policy, we are out of touch. Rudy Perpich, not a guy I agree with on much, once said that Minnesota should not be in the top 10 in taxes, ever. Unfortunately, under the current all-Democrat rule, we're seeing number 1, number 2, number 3 in a number of these tax policies. Overall, we're about 3rd in the country when it comes to tax policy. That's bad for Minnesota. It's bad for Reagan and Will and our new little guy, Ben. I want them to build their business. I want them to build their career here in Minnesota. That's why I'm running for governor. As the one guy that faced down Mark Dayton when he pointed and said, you will raise taxes, you will break, said, Governor, you don't know me and you sure don't know the members of my caucus. We're not going to raise taxes. We're going to make sure that Minnesota is business competitive and tax competitive. We're going to rebuild the economy. When it was all said and done, that $6 billion deficit was a $3 billion surplus, and Minnesota's unemployment rate was off and running. We were building a great economy again. We can do that again, but we have to focus on Minnesotans, not on government, not on big solutions out of Washington, D.C., but out of Minnesotans. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Zellers. Commissioner Johnson, Jeff, it's nice to see you on your feet.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting down, but thank you. Well, thank you guys for moderating. Thank you all for being here. Ben, I think you look fantastic.
Thank you. You look amazing as well.
You're winning now. You're winning.
Thank you so much. You know, for those of you who don't know me well, let me just give you my background in a nutshell. I was born and raised in Detroit Lakes. My wife was born and raised in Crookston. We went to college up in Moorhead. So I'm a child of greater Minnesota, spent about half my life there. We now have been in Plymouth for nearly 20 years. We've got 2 boys. Thor's in high school. Rolf is in middle school. And I have spent most of my life in the private sector, which I think is really important. But during that time, I also served 6 years in the Minnesota House, and now the last 5 years I've been on the Hennepin County Board as the often lonely conservative in the heart of the left-wing beast. And just a few weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I was endorsed by the Republican Party down in Rochester. And the reason I was endorsed, I believe, because everyone sought that endorsement, at least until the last week or so of the campaign. We had thousands of the most active, informed, engaged Republicans who were able to vet us each up close and personal and ask us questions and hear us over and over and over again. And I believe they decided that I am the conservative in the race who can actually win. And I think that's the case because we really need 2 things to win, and I think I'm the only one who can bring that. Number one, we have to have a united and an energized Republican base coming out of this primary. And I think I'm the only one who can come out of the primary with a united and energized base. That's the whole point of the endorsement. But we also need a candidate who can go out there and get more than half the independent votes. And I'm the only candidate in the race who can show that I've been able to pull in independent votes in a very large number, in a very large degree in Hennepin County multiple times. And I think because of that, I'm the conservative in the race who can actually win, and I'd love to earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff Johnson. I will read Marty Seifert's statement before we get to round 1 of the questions from Marty Seifert. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few words with your audience tonight. I regret not being able to participate as our Northern Minnesota volunteer team had previously scheduled an event in Duluth this evening before this debate was finalized. I'm running for governor to bring real leadership to state government. I'm a middle-class husband, father, and small business owner from Marshall, Minnesota, and believe we can do better than Mark Dayton. I also believe that I have the most real-life experience in the race. I was a public school teacher, a realtor. I worked in higher education and was the leader of a hospital foundation in Marshall. I understand balancing family budgets as well as the state budget. I'm also the only candidate who is a lifelong Minnesotan. I was the only candidate to release detailed plans for my campaign on important issues like taxes, government spending, health care, and the failed Minshire exchange and education. I believe government isn't for sale, so I've never accepted contributions from registered lobbyists to my campaign, and I haven't this year. In Minnesota, we cannot win the statewide election without attracting some independents and conservative Democrats. I've never lost a general election in Minnesota. That also makes me different. I have a pragmatic approach to state government and am knowledgeable on the important issues of our time. I'm also the only candidate who has ever worked in healthcare, a pivotal issue in this upcoming general election. Along with my running mate, Burnsville State Representative Pam Myra, we have the strongest, most balanced ticket in the race when you consider geography, gender, and life experiences. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this debate and allowing me to share my thoughts. Please vote Marty Seifert, August 12th. Sincerely, Marty Seifert.
We will now move on to round 1 of our debate. We have a number of questions specifically for each of our candidates. So this will be one question directly at a candidate, and then we'll get your response. We will start with Rachel Stassenberger, the Star Tribune.
And Mr. Honor, you're up first. You have said that you have no legislative experience, as that's a good thing. You've called some of the people who have endorsed your opponents career politicians. If you win, you will have to guide the legislature. How will you do that having no experience in the legislature, not knowing the individuals, and get what you want, particularly if it's controlled by DFLers?
Well, we are going to have a DFL-controlled Senate. But I think the fact that I'm not a politician gives me a real advantage, because I'm not going to be beholden to special interests, and I'm going to be able to make the best decisions for everyone in this state. And I'll tell you, in my business experience, you didn't make things happen. We didn't create success by just waving a wand. You know, I had to work with others to get people to come together. You know, it started with setting a vision of where to go, a plan of how to get there, getting people working together, measuring results. That's the approach that we need in St. Paul, and it's been missing. And we need a governor who's a real leader, who knows how to put together the right team. I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time thinking about who my lieutenant governor should be, because lieutenant governor's been an underutilized position in this state. And I want someone that had a shared set of core principles, that would be smart and articulate in carrying our message across the state, that could help get that legislative agenda passed, and then could market the state. And I found that person in my running mate, Karen Housley. And she's going to help me get this agenda passed. And then once we've got the state on the right track and we've got a bold plan of what we want to do, we're going to go market it. And the way we'll work with that legislature is by getting the state behind us. This is one of the things that's been missing amongst our Republican leaders. Republicans have done a lousy job of conveying how our principles will make people's lives better. And we'll present a very clear case to the citizens of this state about why our agenda is going to improve outcomes for all Minnesotans. And we'll get the citizens of the state working with us in taking on these politicians.
I didn't hear any specifics about how you will work with the House and Senate. Do you know House members? Do you know Senate members? You're going to approach them individually?
Yeah, sure. I've met a whole bunch of senators and legislators and members of the House. But it's about finding common ground, and the common ground in Minnesota, which frankly I'm very optimistic about, is that Minnesotans care for each other. That good neighbor attitude truly exists in this state. And I believe when we find, when we start the conversation with, should we find more job opportunities for Minnesotans, have people have a chance to have higher wages? Should we see more kids graduate and have a better chance for a career or college? We're going to find common ground at the very core of the things we're trying to accomplish. And we'll be able to get that message passed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott Honor. Next question is for Representative Kurt Zellers. Kurt, though you did not vote for the new Viking Stadium, it did pass the House of Representatives while you were Speaker. Do you regret allowing the House to have that vote? Is there anything you wish you would have done differently during that session in regards to the stadium legislation?
Well, first of all, I said very clearly from the very beginning that I would not be voting for the stadium. I'm not a fan of it. When the Twin Stadium came through the House of Representatives, I didn't vote for that either. I think the ownership should be able to pay for it. What I promised from the very beginning for the proponents and the opponents was a fair process. And when you're at the Capitol, any one member can bring up a bill for consideration. In fact, I actually proved it working with some students that were on your show quite often when we brought up the get out of jail free card. Made a motion on the House floor, a little bit late at night. We had to vote. That can happen anytime. So we were going to have the debate. I promised a fair process to the opponents and the proponents. I didn't believe the stadium. I called out the fact that the pull tab revenue wouldn't come in, that there wouldn't be enough money there, and that the ownership should pay for the stadium, not the citizens of Minnesota. So a fair process. You don't want a dictator with this all-Democrat majority, which you have right now. I don't think you want a dictator from our side either. Fair process. I voted no. Again, I wish they would have paid for it themselves.
Can we say anything while we're
You were
in this
name
part
checked,
of
so
the...
no.
No, okay, got it. All right. Didn't know if that was part of this.
Apparently
part
you
of
would
the
have said
debate
And
rule.
Scott Honor disagrees with me. That would have been your opening, but he didn't say that.
Okay.
We'll go with Jeff Johnson. You've said that you support local control regarding mining moratoriums. Is there a limit to the amount of local control that you would allow when that control is detrimental to the welfare of the entire state?
I think so. I think what, and I think one or two campaigns kind of tried to misconstrue what my running mate said about that. What he said was, when he was down in southern Minnesota, that he would be supportive at the state level of a local moratorium on frac sand mining or silica sand mining because the locals ought to have that control, the state not ought to dictate it. The question becomes, what if they want to essentially create a permanent moratorium? And I think there is a limit as to whether you say a 6-month or a year moratorium versus we're just going to ban it forever, because then I think it does become a statewide issue. So where you draw that line, I'm not certain. But I think there is a line to be drawn there.
Well, let's say that it comes down to city budgets, that property taxes are being going up because of city or county boards deciding that they're going to raise that. Would there be a place for the state, even though there's a belief in local control, for the state to step in and stop that from happening at a city or a county level?
I have supported levy limits in the past. In the instances where I have supported them, they have been part of a larger bill where we have granted more money to cities so that they didn't take that money and then also use an excuse to raise their own taxes. So I would support levy limits, at least in certain situations. Should the state, though, be able to say that a local government can only spend so much money? I don't think so. I don't think that's the proper role of the state at all.
We now go to Aaron Rupar of the City Pages with a question for Scott Honor.
Yeah, this question is for Scott Honor. Scott, you've said that you support repealing MNsure and think Minnesota should join the Federal Health Insurance Exchange. Given that subsidies for people who buy health insurance through the federal exchange may be illegal, do you still support Minnesota joining the federal exchange?
Yeah. Well, I'm the only Republican who came out and said, let's not use state taxpayer dollars to bail out Obamacare. Let's shut down MNsure, and let's unwind this program. By the way, the problem isn't just the broken website, which Deloitte said still just recently has 2/3 of its functionality not working. But it's the fundamentally flawed economic premise of Obamacare that's even the bigger problem. The whole idea was that private insurance signups would be of sufficient amount to cover the cost of public program signups. Well, we've had 140,000 Minnesotans lose health care coverage under Obamacare. We've had 50,000 signups. By my math, that's down 90,000. And we just saw this state bail out Obamacare to the tune of $400 million of our state taxpayer money going to support Obamacare. I'm the only one saying, let's not do that. And I've seen these conflicting court rulings. I still say, let's not do that. And by the way, if the federal government's going to try to hold our state hostage, which is what that court case is talking about, trying to force states to create exchanges, well, we need a governor who's going to stand up for the rights of this state and take on the federal government if they're trying to hold us hostage. So yeah, I would certainly shut down MNsure and make sure that we're not putting more of our state taxpayer dollars behind this flawed program.
Representative Zellers, I feel that you felt you were name-checked when Scott Honor referenced other candidates. Jeff will give you an opportunity on this too. MNsure is a big topic.
No,
so
and he can handle MNsure. It's just the statement of fact. Actually, I fought MNsure before it became MNsure. When I was Speaker of the House, Governor Dayton forced us or tried to force us to put MNsure into place. I stopped it there. And while on the House floor, actually voted against giving the federal dollars, giving the Minnesota dollars to bail it out. So, and we've all called for it in several different variations. So I'm the only guy that fought MNsure argument. That's only, I didn't want to get into the
are you
detail.
joining me in calling
Scott,
for
I didn't interrupt you. Marty's
Mr.
not
Honor, you
here.
don't get to respond.
Okay.
Let's give
Marty's
We
right
have a
this
lot of
over
rules
there.
here.
Let's give Commissioner Johnson an opportunity to talk about MNsure. End it, as Scott Honor says, and join the federal exchange, or fix the one we have, or just keep it how it is.
I would have vetoed it. However, we now have it. And I think that this concept of saying now we're going to force everybody who went through the nightmare of MNsure to go through the nightmare of the federal exchange, you're not solving any problem. So, and we can't get out of Obamacare unless we get a waiver, which a couple of us have said would be a top priority for us. I think that is where you start, and then you have a plan B if you can't get that. But I don't think you solve a single part of the problem by just shoving everybody from MNsure to an equally bad federal website.
Maybe, Ben, we should host a scrum in the morning.
I think we needed more. I think you need more rules in order to keep this all straight. You're listening to the Twin Cities News Talk gubernatorial primary debate with candidates Scott Honor, Kurt Zellers, and Jeff Johnson. If you have a question that you'd like asked in the third round of this debate, go to Twitter and use the hashtag TCNT debate. I'll go to Rachel Stassenberger.
Representative Zellers, I have a question for you.
Yes.
During your time as Speaker, obviously the state government shut down due to budget differences. Now, we've heard you talk about how you faced down Governor Dayton and won, so we don't need to hear that again. My question for you is, if you became governor, would you shut down government because of budget differences with a DFL legislature or for any reason at all?
But the premise of the question is that I shut down government. Actually, Governor Dayton shut down government. The bill that he signed after the shutdown had finished was the same bill we presented him before the shutdown. He admitted it. I don't want to use another station's name, but he admitted it on WCCO. He said, I guess I didn't read the bill closely enough, and it was the same bill after we did it than we did before. So the whole process wasn't necessary. It wasn't in the first place. We offered him several different lights on, part of a temporary continuing resolution, you name it. He had more options there. He shut government down for political purposes. That was his choice. It wasn't our choice.
Would you do it if you've signed the No New Taxes pledge, if you were in a situation where they wanted to raise taxes, you didn't, would you shut it down again?
I challenge, especially my Democrat colleagues that have now started to repeal all the horrible taxes that they thought were so great 2 years ago. Now they're repealing this year. I think it's a hypothetical situation that isn't going to happen because I don't think that anybody in the House, we're going to have a majority there, is going to raise taxes. And I don't think any of those senators that just voted to repeal taxes are going to go back again and start raising taxes again.
So as governor, you can't imagine any possibility under which a shutdown would even be in the scenario?
I can't, under the current circumstances or the future circumstances based on past experience, after $2.5 billion in new taxes, $6 billion worth of new spending, all Minnesotans know the government and states taxes too much, it spends too much, and it wastes too much. It's time government lived just like the rest of us within its means.
Thank you, Kurt. Next question is for Jeff Johnson. Jeff, you've said that you want to expand the tax base and lower the rates. What specific goods and services would your administration seek to tax that isn't already being taxed?
Well, I haven't said that I want to do that, but I have said that I'd be open to that. And the reason I'm open to that is because almost every economist you talk to, whether they're a conservative economist or not, would say that the best possible tax policy for growing the economy is low, broad, and simple. And what we have in Minnesota is high, narrow, and complex. It's exactly the opposite of what we need. And so I don't think the answer is to just say, well, let's cut this a little bit here and let's cut that a little bit there. You need to look at the whole tax code. What we need is an overhaul of the whole tax code. And I've said I would be open to looking at a lot of different options, including possibly broadening the sales tax base, but only if we lowered the rate enough that it was at least revenue neutral, if not better.
So does that mean food, haircuts, clothing, if you get to that point?
I would be open to looking at anything. There would be certain pieces of that I think would be much more difficult than others. But, you know, what I've heard some people say is, well, I agree with you, Jeff, and I agree that that's good economics, but it's too scary politically. People are going to get mad at you, so we're not going to do it. And that's just not who I am. If it's right to do on principle, then you put it out there and you talk about it and you consider it. You don't run away from it because it might cause you political problems.
So you wouldn't consider that a new tax?
It would not be a new tax as long as it was revenue neutral, no.
Okay. We go to Scott Honor. Yesterday you criticized Jeff Johnson for not naming specific programs that he would cut from the state budget. Your plan calls for a 10% reduction in the size of state government. Can you provide us with some specifics on what you intend to cut and how you plan on accomplishing this if the DFL retains control, when the DFL can change control in the Senate and possibly controls the Minnesota House?
Sure. Well, we have to have a bold plan for reducing the scale of government. You know, we spend 2.5 times as much per citizen today as we did in 1980 in real inflation-adjusted dollars, and we're spending more money every single year, regardless of who's in control of the governor's office, regardless of who's in control of the House and Senate. It's got to stop. We've got to rein back the scale of government. And I'll cut, what I actually says, I'd cut administrative expenses by 10%, and I'll start with that. I think we can do across-the-board cuts of wasted, and burdensome bureaucracy by at least 10%. And then there's major programs I'd cut. I'd cut MNsure. I'd cut the Minnesota Investment Fund. I'd make sure that we're moving people from welfare to work so we get a double benefit there. And I'll tell you, there's some things that may be smaller dollars that are important. I'd make sure that there's no pay to legislators if there's a government shutdown. I'd get rid of this taxpayer subsidy of campaigns. We got to see the people in St. Paul, on the front line of anything we're doing that's taking money from our pockets as taxpayers.
I guess the thing I'm confused by is that I understand that you want to cut MNsure and understand you want to cut 10% off of administrative costs. But if you've got Democrats in the Senate that won't even recognize the bill, how do you move that forward? I don't believe the executive has the power to undo that on his own.
Well, this is where we're going to work with the citizens of this state to have them understand that our plan is the one that's going to make the state better for everyone. And we've got to have leaders that are willing to take the challenge of marketing what we're trying to accomplish to the state as a whole and get the state behind us. And by the way, we're talking about taking the budget back to where it was just a couple of years ago. That's certainly achievable. But if we don't have the attitude that it's the right thing to do and that we can achieve it, it's not going to happen. And I believe there's plenty of fiscally conservative Democrats in that Senate that are going to like what we're trying to accomplish because it is in the best interest of the state, and we'll sell it to the state.
Thank you.
Commissioner,
Ben,
before we move on, Ben actually name-checked
I was
you
gonna
in
say
his
that.
question.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, how does this work now?
I say
let
that
him
the
respond.
commissioner
Jeff
gets to
responds?
respond to Ben if he
Yeah,
wants
I think
to.
it means I get 4 minutes. Because you guys,
I don't think so.
Stop name checking people.
well, a couple things. Number one, I have given specifics many times over and over again over the last 15 months about where to cut. And there are a lot more places to cut. But number one, we don't need a state OSHA. Number two, we spend $30 million in SHIP grants, state health improvement program grants that tell us what to eat and how much to exercise. That's completely unnecessary. I don't happen to be a fan of light rail or commuter rail or streetcars. So there are lots of different options. We can consolidate certain agencies that I've talked about. So there are a lot of different places that we can save money, but this goes to a bigger issue because, Scott, you have said that we should cut 10% across the board, or that you would cut 10% across the board, because we went back and looked at it after our debate today when you made that clarification, and maybe you've changed your mind on that. I don't think that that is a wise way to approach budgeting, because government does some things well and some things not so well. The Constitution requires government to do certain things and doesn't require the government to do other things. So to say that everything's equal and we're going to cut everything 10% doesn't make sense to me. For example, roads and bridges, I don't think we should cut 10%. In fact, I'd be open to spending more money on roads and bridges. But if you want to look at light rail, for example, I'd be willing to cut a lot more than 10%, probably 10 times 10% on that. So I think it's very simplistic to just say we're going to do an across-the-board cut, and I just don't think it's very realistic or thoughtful.
Oh, I got names.
Yeah, you
so
did
let me
get
say a
names,
couple
Jack,
quick
so-
things here.
Go all night doing this.
Well, I'll make it quick. But, Jeff, I did also call it the fact that I think in your statement you said not only could you not name specific things you cut, but that you couldn't even tackle the budget until the next biennium. And we have to have the attitude that this is urgent for our state. And I never said we're going to cut every single thing government spends on by 10%, and everyone knows that. What I did say was we should reprioritize where we spend, and we can make meaningful cuts to this state. And I'll stand by the fact you can cut administrative costs across the board, because I did that in my business. When we bought and fixed those 60 companies, every single time you could find at least 10% in savings in administrative costs, and we can do this in the state. And these other programs, we have major opportunities to spend less, and there are absolutely places where we should spend more. Roads and bridges, for sure, at the top of the list. And we got to change how we prioritize our spending and think of it all in one bucket and not just all these segregated buckets. We got to change the entire approach to how we budget and spend in this state. And I'll do that, and I've got the experience to do it.
May I?
Yeah,
If
this
my
next
math
question
is correct, we're
Yeah, we're
on
taking
air and
a
asking
roll
Zellers
call.
a
Yeah, this
question.
next question is for Representative Zellers, and it's actually a big one for City Pages readers. Take that
Who
as you
listen to
will.
the station often
Maybe tonight.
and are probably staying at home August 12th.
I was hyping it on Twitter and Facebook.
Do you just want me to call all three of them on the phone? Or?
Oh, wow. I got to think of a tougher question now.
You might get a new question.
Big sharp elbows are only for the
Let me think
candidate.
real quick.
I've been sitting over here for so long. These two kids are scrapping. I gotta have something to do.
I got to give him the name check use, then you can talk as long as you want. But
Fire away.
all right, so I'm curious. As a state representative, you've never supported allowing for Sunday liquor sales. As governor, would you sign a bill passed by the legislature that would legalize Sunday liquor sales?
Sure, I have not. I think just about every time that I voted on it, it's been a big majority against it. But if the legislature, House and Senate, and we know at least one of the bodies is going to be Democrat controlled, if they muster up the votes to pass it, it gets to my desk, absolutely, I'll sign it.
That was anticlimactic.
Gave you a whole
Why do you think I took the
minutes.
shot at him?
You just got the entire City Pages readership voting.
Well, and I
primary.
wonder then what has been the reason in the past for not supporting it?
Again, the bulk majority of the membership didn't vote for it, whether it be small business owners in my district, whether it be Ken, whether it be Mark. They had said, look, this is not something that we support. The industry as itself, that includes all the big box shops down to the mom and pop, the husband and wife owned. They had not come to a consensus amongst themselves. So until they were there, and I think once they are there, then the legislature will also have the votes. They'll have a good representation of their districts. And again, if it gets to my desk, I'll sign it.
All right, last one in round one before we move on to round two. Jeff Johnson, you initially supported Kingfish, the device that allows the Hennepin County Sheriff to track and locate cell phones in the case of a manhunt or abduction, but you've since made statements that indicate a reversal on that position. Has your stance on law enforcement using tracking technology changed? And if so, can you articulate why?
Essentially, it has not. And just to explain to people, because there have been a couple instances where people have really been maybe a little less than genuine about what Kingfish is. Kingfish was the sheriff came to the county board and said that I have a grant to purchase this Kingfish tool that allows us to track the location of a cell phone that's turned on. And really, it's no different than Find My iPhone. It gives you a little beep on the computer. And my concern about that was a privacy concern. This was about 5 years ago. I did support that in the end, him using that grant to purchase that based upon the understanding and the agreement that it would only be used in instances where there was a court order in place. It had been used quite effectively in other states to locate abducted children. So it's an important tool, and it's not a vote that I'm at all embarrassed of because I think there was a good reason to have it. When it came up again last year, my response was, you know, I probably, if this were to happen today, based upon what I know about what government's willing to do with private information, I probably would have required an actual search warrant rather than just a court order, which is a higher standard. So I suppose that has changed. Since then, the House and Senate almost unanimously, I think there was one no vote, passed Kingfish or allowed local governments to use cell phone trackers like Kingfish as long as a court order was in place. And every ticket up here supported that, whether it was the candidate, him or himself, or one of their running mates. And so I think we're all pretty much on the same page with respect to Kingfish. It's an important tool for law enforcement to have, but we have to make sure that there are safeguards for people's personal privacy.
Okay.
You're listening to the Twin Cities News Talk Republican gubernatorial primary debate on KTLK AM 1130 Minneapolis. We are through round one where we ask the tough questions individually. Now we ask the tough questions to all of you. So we will begin with a real challenging one. I've heard all of you criticize our fair governor quite a lot over the past couple of months, but can you name one thing that the Dayton administration has done that you support, agree with, or that you think was good? We will begin with Scott Honor.
Well, I would say I do agree with the governor on repealing the warehouse and farm implement service tax. Shouldn't have done it in the first place, but certainly made sense to repeal it.
All right, Representative Zellers.
I think it was a proactive thing, and I actually worked with them on alternative certification for teachers. This is allowing Boston Scientific engineer who's 55 years old, decides he's going to retire, but wants to get his daughter and some of their friends back involved in electrical engineering and build the next heart valve. So he, rather than going to a 4-year degree in education, can skip the core curriculum part and go right into how do you manage a classroom. So alternative certification was something that was a good idea. It actually helps some of our schools. It will put professionals back into the classroom who have experience in the industry. It was one thing that not only did I vote for, but I'm glad he signed into law.
Hey, Jeff Johnson.
I support something in concept, and that is the whole concept of the unsession. I think it's a great idea to eliminate laws and regulations that are either unnecessary or burdensome. Now, in the end, I think it became a bit of a joke, and they, eliminated wild boar hunting in Edina and the size of your fruit containers and things like that nobody was enforcing. And that's fine, get them off the books. What we should do is start eliminating regulations that are actually being enforced. And so I would do that. But the concept of eliminating unnecessary or burdensome statutes is a good one.
See, it wasn't that hard to say something nice about Mark Day.
If you'd make us do it again, though, I'm telling you, man, we're walking off. Mass walk-off.
Aaron Rupert.
Let's mess with the order on this so it's not always the same.
Not Scott first every time?
Right, so you just have to answer right.
And the next question will be much
to
easier for
Representative
you guys.
Zellers.
Yep.
Sure, fire.
And
Just rotate through.
I don't feel like I should be asking this one as kind of the token lefty up here, but that's the way the cards were dealt here. So,
Yeah.
Kurt, what is the most egregious thing the Dayton administration has done, in your opinion?
See, the last one you had a short answer. I got 5 minutes. I'm
So
going to go.
the challenge here, the
Right.
most egregious, just
The
one.
most egregious, I think, was trying to unionize daycare centers. Miss Steph and Miss Gailey, the two wonderful mother-daughter team that watched Reagan and Will, and quite possibly will be watching my little guy Ben in the very near future, were doing nothing but going about their day, running a small business, doing a great job, helping a lot of families like Kim and I educate their kids, keep them safe while we were at the day, and teach them a lot of life lessons about how to be good kids. Mark Dayton, his big thug unions came in, literally forced their way into these people's homes and tried to unionize them. The tax increases, the expanded government, that's all bad, but going after a mom and a daughter team who's just trying to take care of a dozen or so kids, I think that was egregious. And for what reason? They are not employees. They own the company together. He tried to unionize them just to get the dues.
This is for everybody, so we'll go to Jeff.
Well, I hate to repeat an answer, but I have to agree with that one. And the reason is childcare unionization. And the reason is because it had nothing to do with policy. And this is what drives people bananas about politics, I think, is that, and politicians, is that sometimes you will make decisions not based upon what's good for people, but what's good for yourself and the people who got you elected. And there is absolutely no argument to be made whatsoever, none, for child care unionization other than to pay back the union folks that helped get him elected, including his ex-wife. And that is just abhorrent to me. And my sister has had an in-home daycare for 20 years up in Detroit Lakes, probably more than 20 years. She works on the tiniest margin that you can ever imagine because she never wants to raise her prices on her customers because her customers are her family and these kids are her family. And these women, and in a few cases men, but mostly business women, are working their tails off to provide a service. And Mark Dayton comes in and not based upon some political philosophy makes this decision, but decides to go after them because his political supporters want a favor and he gives it to them. And I think it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Scott Honor, the most egregious thing the Dayton administration has done.
You know, I thought about child care unionization. I also thought about raising taxes. But at the end, I think it's the fact that Governor Dayton continues to trap poor, vulnerable kids in failing schools. And the fact that he's doing the bidding of the teachers union in a way that has our state ranked last place in the country in minority graduation rates, that we're not giving our kids the best chance for a career or a chance to go to college, this is completely unacceptable. You know, and last year the governor vetoed $1.5 million allocation for Teach for America. You know, here's a program where young, recent college graduates go into inner city schools. It's proven to make a difference, and the governor vetoed it because the teachers union asked him to do it, and I think that's completely unacceptable. And as Minnesotans, we've got to call him out on that, and we've got to get our education system working in a way that's going to benefit these kids, and the governor is working against their interests.
We'll go to Rachel Stassenberger with a question for all three, but we'll start with Jeff.
Yes, so we're going to go Johnson, Honor, Zellers, just so you're ready. If you win the primary, the Alliance for a Better Minnesota, the Dayton campaign, and media across the state and the country will be digging into every detail of your background. Your political opponents will be trying to find dirt on you. We're just going to try to find out who you are, us in the media. So is there anything you'd like to get off your chest now with this friendly audience?
Jeff, she's supposed to be looking at you. Why don't you look at me?
Jeff, she knows something.
I'm looking forward to hearing this.
We promise to work it out.
That you'd like to share now because you will be in a position to defend yourself if you win on August 12th. And we'll start with you, Commissioner.
Well, I have been through this once before. If you remember, I ran for Attorney General 8 years ago. And some of you might recall that Matt Intenza had a bit of an issue because he hired a private investigator from Chicago to investigate Mike Hatch, who was the sitting Attorney General. He was trying to dig up dirt on him so he could push him out of the office. It turns out he hired that same guy to do an investigation of me because I was clearly going to be the Republican candidate. And they obviously didn't find anything at that point because nothing ever came up. Now, I can tell you nothing has happened in the last 8 years that is going to cause a problem. And ABM has done the research because they came out with a little video on each one of us the day after or the night of our announcement. What they came up with for me was that I supported Newt Gingrich for president. And Newt Gingrich cheated on his wife, and therefore you can't support Jeff Johnson. That was their video. And we came back at him and said, seriously, that's the best you got, which kind of made him mad. And so then they came out with an email series from a made-up woman named Emily that said, Jeff Johnson pretends to be a nice guy, but he's really an extremist because he's pro-life, he supports traditional marriage, and he has gone to some Tea Party meetings. So if that's as bad as it gets, I think I'm going to be just fine, and I think that's as bad as it gets.
You're squeaky clean?
I am squeaky.
You must be a lot
Your
of fun.
gastroenterologist says otherwise.
Yeah, look at me. No, I'm very squeaky clean now.
You stepped on my joke, Ben. Sorry. With a better joke.
You should see what he stepped on up here.
Secrets.
Well, you know, Alliance for a Better Minnesota attacked me, you know, within hours of me announcing I was running. You know, and what they attacked me on was the fact that I've had a successful business career. They started calling me Minnesota Mitt. Well, you know what? I want to talk about my successful business career. I think it's relevant, and I think it's ridiculous to see this organization attacking success in this country. You know, I feel like I've lived the American dream. When I was born, my family lived in a trailer park. I was the first of my family to graduate from college. And I had success in business by working hard and having the skills to get the job done. Well, that's what I'm offering to the state. I think it's relevant. And I think we've got to recognize that this country is about people living the American dream and having that chance to create opportunity for themselves. And that's what I want to bring to the state. But, they're going to keep, hitting me on the fact that I had success in business and had to make some tough decisions along the way to save jobs and create jobs.
So the skeletons in your closet is your rag to riches American story.
Yeah, well, I am an Eagle Scout, so,
You're in good
I guess
company.
they could go audit my merit badges, but I feel like we're going to do pretty well on that front.
Representative Zellers?
Well, I think any of us who've run for office have already had this, and ABM ran ads against me when I was Speaker of the House, and I think anybody who's run has already had this. If they were going to do anything to me, I think it would have been when we were sitting across the table from Mark Dayton. But Rachel, I do have one. I grew up in North Dakota.
Oh my God. What?
Wow.
If Marty were here, he would point out that fact. But the addition is I can actually see Canada from the backyard of my parents' home. Unlike Governor Palin, I actually can see Canada.
I would like to point out that some of the smartest, best-looking people do come from other states, other than Minnesota.
And I would like to point out that none of the three of you revealed any secrets, which means if I find any, we've got a big gotcha and a lot of tape. So thanks.
Meaning if we hadn't done it, you weren't going to report it otherwise?
Right.
You have nothing for me to look for.
Now, Representative Zellers did name-check Marty Seifert, so we will all sit silently for 2 minutes.
He said silently.
I promised Rachel I wouldn't do that. All right, next question. Scott first, then Kurt, then Jeff. Scott Honor, how will you reform the tax code? Are there any taxes you would support raising? Would you support expanding sales taxes to products and services that are not currently subject to taxation?
Well, this is a big area for us. We've had Minnesotans leaving this state to the tune of $1 million of annual income leaving the state every single day. And we have companies leaving the state. When I talk to companies, they'll talk about regulations as a big reason they're leaving, but they're leaving because of taxes too. I met with a CEO just a couple weeks ago who now runs a company in Texas, but he used to be a senior executive at that IBM plant down in Rochester. And he said to me, his kids live here still. He married his wife, who's from Minnesota, and came back to visit his kids. He said, the shame of it is I'd love to be able to move a business to Minnesota because Minnesota has the best workers in the country. Have all the wonderful physical attributes. It's a great place to live. But I could never, in good conscience, go to my shareholders and bring a business to Minnesota because of your taxes, your regulations. You're not a right-to-work state. And we've got to reform our tax code, our regulatory code, and make other changes to make sure that we're encouraging businesses to come here, not leave. And it's on taxes, it's got to be a comprehensive tax reform. That means completely overhauling the tax code, simplifying the tax code, lowering tax rates, getting rid of a whole bunch of taxes. I'd eliminate corporate income tax. I'd let small businesses reinvest in their businesses with pre-tax dollars. I'd eliminate the estate tax. And this will be a top priority for me in a way that will create a positive virtuous cycle of growth for this state.
All right, Scott Honor, thank you. Kurt Zellers, you are next with this question. How will you reform the tax code? Are there any taxes you would support raising? Would you support expanding sales taxes to products and services that are currently not subject to taxation?
In order, we'd get Minnesota out of the top 10. Again, not exactly a right-wing conservative. Rudy Perpich said that we should never be in the top 10 in taxes, whether it be sales tax, whether it be income tax, whether it be corporate taxes, whether it be property taxes. We should not be in the top 10. That's where you start. That's what brings Minnesota back into a competitive environment with not only our surrounding states, but across the country. And no, I absolutely will not expand sales taxes. Low, broad, and simple is hard, mean, and regressive. It hits those people who can least afford it the hardest. So I don't support a gas tax increase. I don't like expanding it to clothes or to car repairs. You imagine adding another 6, 7, 8% onto the repairs that you already have to pay in your car, which when you go in, you're hoping it's $100. By the time you leave, it's $450. Add another 7 or 8% onto that? Absolutely not, because it hits those who can least afford it the hardest. As far as reform after that, one of the number one things you hear from small business owners, whether they be up in the border states, whether they be right here in the Twin Cities, is small business owners are sick and tired of their property taxes going up on autopilot. There is a provision in our tax code where there's an automatic inflator, just like what the Democrats put onto the minimum wage. That inflator automatically keeps rising their property taxes. That's not fair for small business owners, because they then take that off the top of what could be used for expansion, which could be used for higher wages, which could be used for actually a new addition onto their building, a new sales route, a new vehicle. So I think you absolutely have to start with that. And then we do have to bring down our business tax rate. At 9.8% is one of the highest in the state, but also one of the highest in the country. Or excuse me, state in the country, but also one of the highest in the world.
All right, next that's Jeff Johnson. Well, the question repeated?
No,
Or have you
that's
got
all right.
it? All right.
That's fine. This is probably my biggest disappointment in Governor Dayton. He had probably the greatest chance in a generation to rewrite the tax code in Minnesota, because if you remember, his first 2 years in office, it's pretty much what he talked about. He said, we are going to rewrite Minnesota taxes, and we're going to prepare Minnesota for that. He had Myron Franz, his finance commissioner, traveling all over the state. That's all he did for 2 years, meeting with people all over the state, preparing them for this huge, massive rewrite of taxes. And then he got the gift that almost no governor gets, an all DFL legislature in that November election. He could have actually rewritten the tax code. And what did he do? He put forth a plan which was just a huge tax increase, essentially. And there were a couple of bold things in there, but the boldest thing in there was the business-to-business tax, which almost everybody agreed was a terrible idea, including me. And then when he got pounded on that, he pulled that back and said, well, we'll just make it a big tax increase. So that is what we need. We need a governor who's bold enough to actually rewrite the tax code. And that means corporate tax, that means income tax, that means sales tax, that means property tax. And low, broad, and simple is what I've been saying for 15 months. And I'm not going to let politics get in the way of what is the right thing to do. Bottom line for me, I'm not going to raise taxes, period. I haven't. In my 6 years in the House, I haven't in my 5.5 years on the county board, even though there have been numerous opportunities and pressure to do that, and I won't as governor.
Now, this question, two of you kind of already went over it, but we'll start with Kurt. Do you have any specific target number for the size of the state budget under your administration, and what specifically will you cut or reform?
Well, I think first and foremost, you start with the money that comes in the door. And just because you have 34, 35, whatever $1 billion is, doesn't mean that you spend that all on programs. In Minnesota, the way that the law is written, if you give a tax cut to an individual, that's counted as overall spending in the budget. So if we're going to reduce those property taxes for those small business owners, that's going to count as a part of that $34 or $35 billion budget. I would start automatically off the top at looking for reductions and efficiencies. What we're seeing is the baby boomers moving through the process of retirement. There's going to be an opportunity each and every day as a baby boomer retires to eliminate that position as he or she retires, replace with technology, not reinvigorate yet another bureaucracy with another AFSCME or MAPE employee. You eliminate the job. That's what we did when we took the size of government down by 6% in 2 years, the cost of government down by 8%. So I think that is the best place to start. You look at the MA, we've maybe $10 million, I think the governor released last week. CMS has already targeted Minnesota as a place for waste, fraud, and abuse. There are probably not only millions, but tens of millions of dollars still available right there. And then lastly, you look at MnDOT. When they passed the gas tax a few years ago, the veto override, they said, what we'll do, though, if we're going to get a gas tax is we're going to, by golly, go in and reform the way we do this work. We're going to look for efficiencies. We're going to look for effectiveness. To this day, not one piece of paper has come out of the agency of how they've decided to fix it. They bought on the gas tax. They didn't deliver on the reforms they promised that they would do for the citizens of Minnesota.
Do we want to go to Jeff and Scott? You have already. Do you want to re-clarify just real quickly what you said earlier in the?
Yeah, well, I don't have a specific number. But what I can guarantee everybody is every budget that I propose and sign will be smaller than the budget before it. I don't know if that means 4% smaller or 8% smaller or 12% smaller, but it will be smaller because government spends way more than it needs to right now. And I think most Minnesotans actually agree on that. So that's the bottom line principle. I have set forth a lot of different things that I would seek to cut. and I won't repeat them now, but what I will tell you is the only way that we are truly able to get a handle on the size of this budget is if we start looking at health and human services, because it's one of the two biggest areas of the budget, and it's also the area of the budget where we are most out of whack with states that are similar to us. And so one of the three goals that I've had since I've started this campaign is to audit the programs that taxpayers fund, starting with the human service programs. And we start there because they're the easiest ones to measure. This is my life on the Hennepin County Board. You can measure whether you're moving people from welfare to self-sufficiency over the long term. And as we measure those programs, and it will take a year or two to do those measurements, those that are actually doing what we claim to want them to do, changing people's lives, those should make the cut. In fact, in some cases, we should celebrate those programs, maybe even bolster them. But the programs that don't, the programs that we're funding because it makes us feel good, and there are a lot of them because I see them every day, we need to end those programs and either redirect some of that money, but more importantly, let the taxpayers keep some of that money. That is how we truly are going to get a handle on the budget.
Now, Scott, I realize I asked you this question earlier, but
Well, I got a couple comments.
Target number for the budget, and what would you cut?
Well, look, I'm the only one that's put forth a spending plan, which you can see on our website and read. And I'm the only one that's got a bold plan for meaningful spending reductions. And, Kurt, you talked about...
Name check.
Yes, I'm saying Kurt, so we're good time. But, Kurt, you said, let's not be one of the 10 highest tax states in the country. Well, to me, that's not good enough. Let's lead. In this country, in the last decade, 62% of the jobs are created in the 9 states with zero personal income tax. Let's go directionally that way. Let's be a leader. Let's create real cuts to spending and reduce taxes and put money back in the hands of families and small businesses to get this private economy going in a stronger way. Now, Jeff, you said health and human services is the fastest growing part of the government. True. So I said Jeff. True, and you're exactly right. But then why not call for eliminating MNsure like I have? We just saw the state spend $400 million of our state taxpayer money to support Obamacare in Minnesota, and I'm the only one calling for unwinding that. We need a leader that's going to be bold in getting this agenda passed.
We're going to stop you there before you name check people in the audience.
I'm not going to name Marty, so don't worry.
Okay.
Kurt, you want to name check first.
I got a name for Marty. No, but not name check, sorry.
Shots are fired.
So, I don't agree with you, Scott. I think we should get it out of the top 10. I think we should be in the middle of the pack. But you can't get to go from number 3 to 25 in one term. I think by setting up an expectation that you are, all you're doing is setting up an expectation for people who, in the business community, look at you and go, yeah, right. We were near the bottom of the top 10 with Governor Pawlenty in charge, and we went back up to number 3. You have to set an expectation. I absolutely agree we're going to have a reduction in spending. Again, how you're going to do that, you can go in with the 2x4 and say, by God, this is the way we're going to do it, and Tom Bach will give you a smile and a pat on the shoulder and say, we'll see you in May. Or you go in and as those programs and as those individuals are retiring, you introduce technology and then you don't hire the job on the backside because that's what they're going to fight you on. So I don't disagree with anything you say. We should be out of the top 10. We should be out of the top 20 if you would agree. But we're not going to do it in 2 years. But it's an incremental approach. Is once the business community knows that there is not only consistency, but there is an absolute calm to our tax policy, then they are going to expand. They will create the revenue that will be able to drop us out of the top 10 and then further from there.
And then Jeff Johnson.
Well, I think boldness is important and good, and I think I've probably been criticized a few times for being a little too bold in some of the things that I've said. But I'm also a believer that we have to be honest with people. We can't promise everybody the world. We can't promise that we're going to cut government spending 10% across the board. Because it's not realistic, and I think that annoys people about politicians is that you'll hear a promise after a promise after a promise that I'm going to get rid of MNsure. Well, maybe that's the right goal. I don't happen to believe that moving people over to the federal exchange is an answer to the problem, but the governor doesn't get to do that alone. So being bold is important, but I think also being honest with people is important.
All right, we now go to Aaron Rupar. You'll be starting off with Jeff.
Yeah, kind of a bread and butter issue here. Jeff, starting with you. What is your plan for managing the Met Council? Will you consider eliminating it? If so, how will regional planning issues and projects be managed?
I deal with the Met Council every day on the county board, so I think I'm probably closer to the Met Council than anyone else in the race. And I think the original intent of the Met Council made sense, and that was to have a regional body to handle sewer and water and possibly an integrated bus system, and I still think that makes sense. The problem, of course, with the Met Council is that those are very much secondary issues now to everything else, essentially trying to control people's lives. And so my ultimate goal would be to eliminate the Met Council and start over with a new regional entity that has those two sole purposes of sewer and water and an integrated bus system. They would not have taxing authority, because I don't think unelected officials should ever have taxing authority. That should go through the legislature and elected officials. However, you always need a plan B, because once again, that's my ideal world. I don't know if a DFL Senate will agree with that. So we try that. If that doesn't work, then you go with what you can do, and that is that the governor gets to appoint all the members of the Met Council. I would remove every single one of the members, and I would appoint them with members that agree with me on the proper scope and role of that organization. And I've had people say to me, Jeff, if you do that, the Senate's not going to confirm them. And my response is, fantastic, then we won't have a Met Council, and it won't be my fault, it'll be the Senate's fault, and then they can take the blame for it. So I think we do need to have some sort of regional authority. I think that's actually a conservative principle, so that we don't have 17 different entities all trying to do the same thing on top of each other. But certainly the Met Council, as it exists, needs to go.
Jeff, Ben and I humbly accept our appointments to your new
I
Met Council.
have had
How much does it pay?
Yeah, does it pay?
more applications for the Met Council than everything else put together so far.
All right, Scott Honor is next. What is your plan for managing the Met Council? Will you consider eliminating it? If so, how will regional planning issues and projects be managed?
Well, we should eliminate it. And the Met Council is a classic example of government getting bigger and bigger and bigger and just getting out of control. Here you have an unaccountable, unelected board. It has taxing authority. It's now trying to push a mandate on all of us about where we should live and work. That's way beyond the scope of the good idea that was behind why it was created, to deal with sewers between municipalities. By the way, it's not even dealing with that original problem. I grew up in Mound, out on the west side of the Twin Cities. You probably all heard about how Mound had to dump a bunch of sewer into Lake Minnetonka because they couldn't get the sewer system working well. Well, gosh, if you've got the Met Council not even be able to deal with its original mission, and it's instead on this big plan of building this $1.7 billion light rail from Minneapolis to Eden Prairie, this thing's gotten way out of control. We got to shut it down and get back to the idea of smaller government doing fewer things. And we should have a regional, sewer and water authority, an integrated bus authority makes sense, but just do those things. And otherwise, let's unwind, the Met Council and, get this state going in the right direction.
Kurt Zellers, Met Council.
Sure. First of all, you take away their taxing authority. But if you really want, and I've had the opportunity to watch when Governor Plenty put guys that are equally as qualified and handsome as Jack and Ben. They just missed a compliment. I'm not surprised.
Oh, we're working. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Moderating's hard.
It is.
But
There's questions and things.
taking away their tax authority. But if you really want to put the fear of God in the people that are on the Met Council, one really simple and perfect way, you make them electable. Just like a mayor, just like a county commissioner, just like a city council member. Make them go before the people and have to answer for the boneheaded ideas by putting in trains, by having a master plan, central planning for where you live, how you live, what you could travel with there, if you have to ride a bike, if you have to ride on a train. Make them electable. Let them go before the voters like the three of us are, like any of us who've run for public office before, and then let the voters see. That's the face of the Met Council over there, not some board that every 4 years gets shuffled up and the governor gets to pick the 5 most conservative or the 5 most liberal people they can find based on your political party. Make them run for re-election and then take away their taxing authority.
So I'm up with the next question. We have now made it through an hour of this debate. So we've all survived the first hour, just a little bit more to go.
Half an hour left, and we're going to try to get through these round 2 questions a little bit quicker so we can get to our audience questions.
I believe the lady was talking.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. So let's talk a little about the Senate office building. Since we have gone through an hour, I don't need to hear all the reasons you don't like it. Instead, let's talk about the fact that if any one of you take office, the hole will already be in the ground. Construction is supposed to start, I believe, next month. And so what will you do with a building that is yet under construction when you take office? What will you do with that hole in the ground? And where will you house the senators who are supposed to move out of the Minnesota State Capitol during the construction of that building? And we will start with Scott Honor.
Well, I think let's take the second part first. Where will we house the senators? Let's lease some space. But I think we could cut that cost by, let's cut the number of senators by, say, a third. We have more senators
And
than
you'll do that by 2015?
Oh, I don't think so. But the Senate office building is something that is really showing the arrogance of these politicians, because here you have $77 million going to a project that's really an edifice to the senators and the governor. And we're taking money away from bridge safety and important priorities for the state. So what I would do is look at the point where we're in office, does it make sense to either just stop the project, let's spend no more money on it, or finish it and sublease the space? But under my administration, I wouldn't want to see our senators in that building. And let's make sure that the state's dollars are being used in a way that serve the citizens of the state, not the state senators.
Kurt Zellers.
No, Johnson's next.
Johnson's next? Oh.
Nope.
Go
Johnson's next.
Scott, Kurt, Jeff. That's the order we've been going in, young lady.
They're wrong, but it's fine.
Rachel,
we were the ones with the sharp elbows.
Rachel, I will allow Jeff to go first.
Jeff,
to
go
make
ahead.
sure that you were properly paying attention up
You
there.
just didn't know what to say yet, did you?
Oh, I got plenty to say.
Zellers is solid.
I got plenty to say about that thing.
Well, I'd have to agree with Scott on this one. I think you have to make a determination of what makes the most sense. Do you move forward with it? My preference would be to fill the hole. If we, maybe we wasted $5 million, that's better than wasting $77 million. But if you're so far along and that doesn't make any sense anymore, then you finish the building and you use it for something else, because there is no reason whatsoever that 67 part-time senators should be staying in that building. There is plenty of room in the Capitol, and everybody knows there's plenty of room in the Capitol, especially considering all the money we're spending to renovate the Capitol. Where you put them in the meantime, I suspect we'd have to spend some money to find places for them, but there is a lot of office space all over the Capitol complex. Some of it's not all that nice, but you know what? Maybe they could live with it for a year or two.
If it's used for something else, I picture Tom Bach just kind of loitering around during the day,
Swimming in the pool out
telling people he's responsible for the building. Representative Zellers?
Sure, and I did drive past there not too long ago, and I do think I saw a couple of senators actually with shovels digging faster, more furiously, so that the hole would actually be dug sooner, so they could get the building finished. It's sunk cost, whether it's $4 million, $5 million. If Chris Christie can cancel the tunnel, Kurt Zellers can cancel the Senate office building, plain and simple. Where do you put them afterwards? There are plenty of rooms. Zerwas is in the room. Representative Zerwas, Representative Hoppe. I'm sure one of us, all of three of us, would be happy to take a senator in. We'll give them a little extra space for their powdered wig, but we will take a senator into our office over at the state office building. There's the Centennial building where the Capitol Press Corps has been displaced for far longer than the state senators or the state reps. There's plenty of space on the Capitol complex. You move folks around. You finish one half of the building on the front end, then you move everybody over there. Then when that side's done, you move them across the other side of the building. If we can't figure out that for people that are there 5 months out of 1 year, maybe 3 months out of another year, out of 24 months, ballpark 8 months, they can't find someplace, that's ridiculous.
Okay. Next question. We'll start with Kurt, then Jeff, then Scott. What is your position on legalizing or decriminalizing?
You speak for a living, right?
Criminalize?
Zip it. What is your position on legalizing or decriminalizing recreational marijuana? Will you repeal or expand access to medical marijuana? And are you high right now?
Asking the questions no one else will ask.
Aaron's readers want to know.
And if you could answer that last question first.
Yeah, you're not going to hear this one on NPR, No, I didn't vote for the bill. For me, when we were watching the discussion at the Capitol, there weren't doctors, oncologists, medical professionals down there presenting the bills. If that's the test, I think if that's what they're prescribing for their patients, they would have been down there absolutely testifying on behalf of it. So I wouldn't expand it to recreational use by all means. So I'm batting 500 with your listeners now, Aaron. But I also would not expand the current program either.
Okay. Jeff.
I do not support recreational legalization, and don't expect I'll ever get to that point. I don't think you can make the argument that that makes society better, even though I happen to have a bit of a libertarian streak in me, just like Mark Dayton, I'm told. However, I would support, and this gets me in trouble with Republican activists all the time, but I would support going further on medical marijuana. I happen to think what passed was a bit of a joke. I think the purpose of that was to give cover to the governor so that he could say he did something even though he did almost nothing. And my philosophy is that the government should get in between a doctor and patient as seldom as possible. There should be as little interference from the government between the doctor-patient relationship as possible. And I'm consistent on this issue. Now, I would only agree to expand it further if there were some very, very strict controls over access so it could not be used as just a backdoor way for recreational legalization. And the bill that I've pointed to is one that I'd be most comfortable with is the one in Illinois that has 3 requirements. Number one, it can only be prescribed for a very short list of very serious illnesses. It can only be prescribed in very small amounts. And the most important, number 3, it can only be prescribed by a doctor who already has an existing relationship with the patient, so that you don't turn into California that just has all of these pot doctors that set up shop in the strip malls and give you a prescription because you say something's wrong with you. But I would be willing to go at least a bit further than where they've already gone.
Scott?
Okay, Scott.
Well, I'm not for legalizing marijuana, and I was against the medical marijuana bill. You know, the way I think about this is, you know, we already have a process for the medicinal use of any drug, which runs through the FDA. And having our state now try to have its own plan, you know, that works separately from the FDA process doesn't make sense to me. I mean, what's next? Having our state change Lipitor dosage levels? You know, we've got to be smart and use some common sense about how we go about this. And, you know, so I would repeal that law if that was put in front of me, and I certainly won't support legalizing marijuana.
Okay.
All right, now we are getting to the, here's the last question.
Nobody
for
answered the
second
third
round.
part of my question.
I'll do a field test if you want me to. Look at this pen.
We can only assume the worst now.
Final question in round 2 for everybody. We'll start with Scott. We've had 2 years, 2 consecutive years with bonding bills, and 3 if you count the one before that. What should be in a bonding bill, but what shouldn't be in a bonding bill? And should we have one every year or every other year?
Well, this gets back to the idea that our politicians accept the status quo, that the way things are the way they have to be. And you know, we need to think about how we spend in this state in a different way. And when we have long-term capital projects that need funding that we can't fund out of our current budget, well, that's the point to use bonding. But what we're seeing already in this last bill was all kinds of earmarks of politicians, giving pork to themselves to help themselves get reelected, and putting things in the bonding bill that really should have been in the annual budget. And so I'd eliminate that. And to me, we don't have to think about it in a every year or every other year context. We should think about this as, what are our spending priorities? Let's separate them between things we spend money on annually or biannually in the state budget process. And what do we spend things on that are long-term projects? And when we don't have enough money to cover it from cash, now let's talk about bonding. It shouldn't be just some automatic program that has us going and borrowing money. We're approaching it in a backwards way. What happens now is our governor and our legislators say, let's go borrow money, then let's talk about how much we spend or what we spend it on. That's not the way to approach it.
Kurt Zellers.
Infrastructure, roads, and bridges. The earmarks that Representative Hausman put into this bill, and I name-checked her, but there's no way she's calling into this.
I've asked.
Yeah,
she's not coming on.
She's not calling in. She put all kinds of earmarks into the bill that actually fund metro projects and actually inner-city metro projects that greater Minnesota cities can't use for their use. A $90 million Senate office building, because in the $77 million of the $90 million, if you guys, just so you guys know, they took that little extra part off the top. They're going to make the employees that live in the building and work in the building pay for the other part of that building. So it's still a $90 million building. We also look at from a standpoint of how, when you are going to bond, how do you prioritize? And it shouldn't be regional. It shouldn't be who's in the majority at that point in time. It should be what is the need of the state, especially when it comes to infrastructure. Infrastructure, roads, and bridges only.
Jeff Johnson.
Well, the rule that I've always had for bonding bills is they are supposed to be for projects that are of statewide or at least broad regional significance, not for to help one community or one senator or a couple of House members. And unfortunately, we've gotten to the latter. And that's why the bonding bills have become so preposterously big. They're full of a bunch of favors that allow people to get reelected. So my standard would be anything in there, is it of regional or statewide significance? I certainly don't believe we should have a bonding bill every year, and I don't necessarily believe we have to have one every other year. Maybe it could be less often than that.
All right, that's it for round two. We now go to questions that we got from our audience earlier this evening, and from a number of the questions that you have submitted on Twitter using the hashtag TCNT debate. We will begin with Aaron Rupar with a question from the audience.
Yeah, and this question comes from Heidi, and there's no hashtags, unfortunately, in this, but I think it'll work nonetheless. Heidi asks, insurance is currently regulated by each state, but would you support a proposal allowing people to buy insurance across state lines?
Where are we at?
We will start with Kurt, then Jeff, then Scott.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the ways that you actually bring costs down in insurance. In Minnesota right now, we have United Healthcare, a great big giant insurance company located down in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. They can't sell you an insurance policy. If your company is headquartered over in Hudson, Wisconsin, you can get a policy from your company that's there and then actually get service here in Minnesota, but you can't actually have, United Healthcare can't send you a policy. I think if you can buy your insurance from a lizard at 2 o'clock in the morning for your car, you should be able to shop around for your health insurance as well.
Jeff.
Absolutely, and I think it's probably one of the single biggest things we could do to bring down the cost of insurance if we could do it around the country. Absolutely.
Scott.
Well, and Heidi, thanks for the question. You're spot on. We should be able to buy insurance across state lines. We got to be doing other smart things that improve wellness and lower the cost of health care in our state. You know, other ideas are health savings accounts and, you know, making sure that we see our Medicaid eligibility requirements tightened and having our Medicaid plan partner with the private sector in a way that could lower costs across the board. So, you know, this is one of many things we should be doing to improve health care and lower costs for all Minnesotans.
Okay,
Rachel has a question from Twitter.
Yes, so we have a hashtag user named Matt who asks about the minimum wage. Too high, too low, Matt asks, and Rachel Stassenberger at Rachel SB adds on to that. At the end of this week, I believe, the minimum wage will bump up for the first time for many years, and then it will bump up successively for several years to come. Would you, as governor, undo those next bumps if you were in charge?
It's Jeff. Yep.
Jeff?
Right. I would not have signed the minimum wage increase that passed this past year because I think that this minimum wage increase actually is going to hurt the people that we claim to want to help, which is the lowest wage workers and the least educated workers. However, it is in place now. And one thing that I think is difficult for our business community is when they have no predictability as to what happens next. So I'm not sure reopening that particular debate makes sense. I do not support the automatic inflator. I think that's terrible policy. I think that if we're going to raise the minimum wage again, the legislature should have to pass it and the governor should have to sign it. But to me, this goes to the bigger issue of the business climate in Minnesota. You go to North Dakota, and they've got some other things going on, I understand that, but the business climate in North Dakota is pretty positive right now, and their minimum wage is entirely irrelevant because the market is demanding that everybody's paid probably higher than the minimum wage. And if we had a healthy economy in Minnesota and if we were creating new businesses every year, the minimum wage at some point hopefully could become irrelevant here too because the market would demand that the bottom wage be higher than $10 an hour.
Scott.
Okay, Scott.
You know, I worked my way through college holding minimum wage jobs, you know, including having a job shoveling horse manure, which, as an aside, I think will be a useful skill in St. Paul. And you know, the fact that we're raising minimum wage to a level that's going to reduce the number of jobs available in the state, you know, just doesn't make sense. It's going to harm the economy of the state. So I would hold the line on wages where they are and push to make sure that we're not seeing these additional increases.
And so when the increases go into effect in 2015 and 16, you would stop those? You would try to
I would look to stop those, yes.
Kurt Zellers.
First of all, no, I would not have signed the bill the way it was. Second of all, I would absolutely take the automatic inflator off, which is, the way the bill is written, is one of the provisions that the governor would have control over. You're not going to be able to repeal the actual increase in the minimum wage with a DFL Senate. But, and sorry, to hashtag Matt and hashtag Rachel, the point of the conversation and where especially Governor Dayton is just absolutely missing it is you're talking about a minimum wage job. You talk to Minnesotans out there, they want to know what you're going to do about their career. It's not about your next job. As a kid growing up on the farm, I could find a whole bunch of jobs. I bagged groceries, I delivered pizza, paid my way through college dealing blackjack. I can find all kinds of jobs, but what are you going to do to find more careers for our state? That should be the conversation. The fact that the governor's fighting and bashing, dividing Minnesotans against each other based on how much you tick up every year or on a penny or an automatic inflator misses the point. Is we need more careers in our state, not just minimum wage jobs.
Okay, the next question from the audience comes from Mark. He's a teacher. And we'll start with Scott and then Kurt and then Jeff. We all know that you all generally want more local control of education. What two things, well, someone's getting greedy, what two things can you do, regardless of what party controls the House and the Senate, to ensure more successful schools and equitable funding across all school districts? Scott.
Well, we have to, and thanks for the question, Mark. We've got to make sure that our state understands what's going on in education. And we have too many politicians talking just about money and not results. And I'll focus on results. How do we get better results in education? You know, this governor just passed a law eliminating a basic skills test for teachers. He eliminated having any standards for graduation. We've got to get back to the idea of having standards. Let's have them set locally. Let's make sure we have the best teachers teaching, which means getting wasted dollars out of administrative expense, put it in the classroom, pay teachers more, but pay them based on performance, which means getting rid of teacher tenure and getting rid of this last in, first out rule where it's illegal for a school to hire any teacher other than the last one hired. And to get that agenda passed, we've got to be communicating with the state across the board to make sure people understand how this teachers union is working against the interest of students, and I'll do that. And I'll make sure this state knows that there's a better way to give our kids the best chance for a career or college.
Kurt Zellers.
You need the question again.
No, specifically to your question, Mark, sadly, no. There's nothing that a governor can do unilaterally to change policy. What you can do, though, is you propose a budget and you focus. You use the bully pulpit to direct where you believe our state's education system should go. I'm a fan of charter schools and opportunity scholarships. My wife, Kim, has been a teacher now for 13 years, been in the union, paid her dues, and is a conservative Republican. It is bold for us to come up here in front of all of you and get questioned. She is downright brave to go into a teachers union lounge as a Republican married to me. You need to listen to the teachers and the teachers that are in the classroom every day, not the bureaucrats. The two things that I would do, Mark, and this is where I would push as governor, you absolutely end LIFO. Last in, first out is a policy that keeps the good teachers who have been there and have been striving thrown out of the building because they signed their contract in my wife's school 1 week and 1 hour after the guy who was before them. The second thing I would do is parent trigger. You allow those parents in that school system to once again say, the system has failed us, whether it be the administration, whether it be the teachers, whether it be the principals. That has failed us. We need to go in. The last thing I would say, so it's 3 points, Mark, sorry I added one on for you, is STEM schools. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. As governor, you bring in the Boston Scientifics, the 3 M's. You show what that can mean to students as a governor. That's using the bully pulpit for a good purpose. Those are my 3 things, Mark. Yeah, sorry to give you a bonus one.
All right, Jeff, I'll give you the question again because it's been a while since we've all heard it. In radio, we call that resetting. We all know that you all generally want more local control of education. What 2 things can you do, regardless of what party controls the House and the Senate, to ensure more successful schools and equitable funding across all school districts?
Well, I think that there are things the governor can do that are meaningful, regardless of whether you have a DFL House and a DFL Senate, that don't require legislation, because you get to appoint your education commissioner. So for me, that would be probably the most important appointment that I would make, an education commissioner who is a true, bold, unafraid reformer.
and who's actually willing to take on the establishment and the teachers union with respect to a lot of different issues. And then from there, I think you start getting people involved, getting administrators and principals and
teachers involved, especially when you're trying to deal with the achievement gap in the cities here, who have shown an ability to take the toughest demographic of kids and lead them to success. Because we've got success stories in Minneapolis with some of the toughest kids. And that has an awful lot to do with the teachers, principals, and administrators. And get them involved in government. It doesn't mean you ask them to be your commissioner, because they probably wouldn't want to be. That wouldn't be their idea of a great time. But get them intimately involved in helping you to set policy. And then you instill through your commissioner and through those people that get involved a culture that we're making education decisions based upon what's best for the kids as opposed to what's best for the adults in the system, which is kind of what I think we see right now.
All right, we are crunched for time, so we're going to ask one more online question. It'll be a short answer on this. Aaron Rupar?
Yeah, we've talked education, taxes, budgeting, and now it's time for the really important question that comes from Andrew Schindler on Twitter, who asks, what kind of beer will you buy on the Sunday after you legalize the sale of liquor in Minnesota? And Kurt, I believe you're a fan of Leinenkugels, is that right?
I am now. I'd probably go, Summit's my favorite, but there's a few of the new draft beers, the North Minneapolis draft beers. Angry Blonde is one of them. I think I'd probably go with that.
Jeff Johnson?
Good answer.
Number one, I will sign a bill to legalize Sunday liquor sales. Number two, I'd probably go with Fat Tire. We have a Christmas party fundraiser every single year with Santa's Beer Buffet, where we bring in 5 different craft beers made in Minnesota and let everybody do a taste test. And Fat Tire almost always wins because that's kind of our staple.
Good answer. They're not from Minnesota, though, but that's okay.
Scott Honor?
I'm going to go with Lift Bridge.
Solid.
All right. All right, we will now do our closing statements. We will give each of our candidates 2 minutes in order to finish off here. We will go in reverse order from the opening statements. So,
Jeff, Kurt, Scott.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thank you again for doing this. I think this was one of the more fun debates. We've probably had 30 or 35 of these since the start of the campaign, and this has been one of the more enjoyable ones, so thank you for that. I think that one of the most important jobs of a Republican candidate for governor is to present a vision to Minnesotans that actually inspires them to pick us over all the promises that they're going to get from Mark Dayton and the DFL, because we kind of start out in a hole. And so here's the vision that I have been sharing with Minnesotans that they have been responding to. I've got a vision of a state where politicians understand that taxpayers actually work really, really hard for their money, and we treat it just as carefully as though we're coming out of our own pocket, which we're not seeing happening right now. I've got a vision of a state where every kid has access to a great education regardless of where that kid lives, and that doctors and patients are making health care decisions and not insurance companies and not government. And I've got a vision of a state where we're not just constantly taking more money from taxpayers, but we're trying to find ways to unleash the innovative power of individuals and entrepreneurs to actually grow our economy and benefit us all. And most importantly to me, I have a vision of a state where we've ended this philosophy of the poor are poor and the rich are rich, and all we can do is redistribute the wealth, and instead we are preaching every single day a sincerely held belief that the poor can become the middle class and the middle class can become rich, and anyone who starts with nothing can achieve anything in this great state. That is the sort of message I think that resonates with your average Minnesotan who isn't a Republican, and the only way we win is if we actually get the votes of your average Minnesotan who isn't a Republican. So I would appreciate your support on August 12th. Thank you.
Kurt Zellers.
Well, thanks again to the panelists, especially for your great questions and for letting us jibe back a little bit forth with you guys. Minnesota's at a crossroads. We have seen big government, high taxes, a constant expansion of every aspect of government into our lives. I got into this race because of Reagan, Will, and Ben. I want to make sure that the future for our state is as great as it is today for us, as it has been in the past, is there for them. What we see is higher taxes, more government, more spending. The solution, my friends, is not more government. It is each other. It is all of us together. It is making sure that every single one of us has a belief that the man or woman sitting next to us has the opportunity and the ability to succeed beyond their wildest dreams, limited only by their own desire and drive, not by how much the government tells you can do or can't do. I'm a middle-class dad. I'm married to a public school teacher. I coach my son's hockey team. Going to be in my daughter Reagan's father-daughter dance contest next spring, so God help me on that. I've lost my job. I've been lucky enough to work in Fortune 500 companies and serve the great people of Maple Grove and Osseo. You want experience. You want the guy that sat across the table from Mark Dayton when he said you're going to raise taxes. I said no. We can do it with a faith in fellow Minnesotans. That's what made not only our state great, but made our country one of the absolute best in the world, and that will be in the history of the world. We can do that again, but we have to have a good cheerleader and a great salesman. I will sell Minnesota, whether it's products, whether it's commodities, whether it's our financial services. I will be a salesman for Minnesota like you've never seen before. I will travel the world. I will travel the country selling what our Minnesotans do best, and that is deliver a product and service better than anybody else. We haven't seen that out of the last 4 years. We've seen division amongst ourselves, take from those guys, give to these guys. That's not who we are as a nation. We are an aspirational nation. We're not envious of one another. We are here for each other. We can do this together. I ask for your vote on August 12th.
And finally, Scott Honor.
Well, thanks for having me. You know, the Minnesota I grew up in was excellent and strived for excellence. And I want to get back to that attitude of excellence versus the attitude of accepting mediocrity that we seem to have in government today. And we need real leadership to make that happen. And, you know, the guys I'm competing against are nice guys, but they seem to be running to be starting goalie. I'm running to go on offense. You know, I've got the bold plan for reducing spending. I'm the only one calling to eliminate MNsure. I'm the only one who's called on President Obama to say, let's not move the immigration crisis from our southern border to our state's border. I'm the only one calling for term limits. And I'll make sure that we have the plan and resources to win this race. And that matters a lot. You know, I've raised twice as much as the governor this year. I've raised significantly more than any of these other candidates. And we have to have a candidate that can carry the mantle and get this job done in November. And I'll do that. And then I'll dedicate myself to making this state great. And so I look forward to having your support. Thanks so much.
We want to thank the candidates for joining us here tonight, Jeff Johnson, Scott Honor, Kurt Zellers. We'd like to thank our fellow moderators, Rachel Stassenberger of the Star Tribune, Aaron Rupar of the City Pages. Thanks for taking time out of your night. Everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us here in person. Thank you for your questions. And for everyone who was listening online and asking questions on Twitter with the hashtag TCNT, thank you as well.
All right, be sure to listen to Up and Adam tomorrow morning, 6 to 9 a.m. like you do every weekday. Rachel Stassenberger with the Star Tribune will be joining us tomorrow at 7 to break down this debate. And as usual, Aaron Rupar with the City Page will be joining us at 8 on Friday to talk about City Page's news. Keep your radio dial here as today's Jason Lewis Show will be broadcast in its entirety.
Thank you for listening to the Twin Cities News Talk gubernatorial primary debate.